Well, thank you all for coming. Those of you who were able to make it in. Let me introduce myself. I'm Steve Raye, president of Beverage, which is a marketing consulting company that specializes in helping wine brands break into the US market and grow once they're there. We do brand development work with new to the world brands as well as new to the US brands, trade marketing, an area of specialization, as well as digital and social and non-traditional media. And we're going to be talking a bunch about that stuff as we go forward here. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is kind of how we're going to approach everything here. And the way to think about it is you have to think differently. How are you going to gain a competitive advantage? The same old ways of doing things as we have in the past aren't working. It's getting more and more challenging for wine brands coming to the U.S. to find importers once they're here, to find distributors once they have distributors, to get retail distribution, and so on, and on-premise distribution, and then ultimately consumer pull. So how do you do that? And here's kind of a simple graphic way of thinking about it. If we think of the equation of zig and zag, all right, our strategy is you need to zag when everybody else is zigging. You absolutely have to be doing things differently in order to gain a competitive edge. Okay, and what does that really mean? Okay, well, let's put that in terms of marketing philosophies, and I call it a marketing manifesto. And it contains a couple of pieces. The most important one is measure what matters. Traditional media metrics like reach and frequency and those sorts of things certainly have value, but they really don't correlate with or drive volume. We kind of know that, we've kind of accepted that, but now we have tools at our disposal that allow us to measure that stuff and get closer to real-time ways of doing it. Now, you can do that through Salesforce.com, through Diver. There's a whole bunch of proprietary information out there. But we're going to be looking at sales on and off premise, and not just sales, but cases, value, and velocity, trying to understand what the dynamics are of those sales. Depletions are much more important than shipments or exports. Distribution on and off premise is critical, but also quality is a key piece. And then lastly, reorder rates, wine lists, and buy the glass programs. And the idea there is if you're in the restaurant, or you're on the floor of the store, or you're in the store on the shelf, that's fine, but you need to be on the floor to really make an impact. The second piece of the equation is the philosophy of don't market to empty shelves. We've seen this happen in the past, that people want to get ahead of themselves. They want to start the advertising because they've worked on all the creative. But if you haven't gotten the distribution out at retail, then you're wasting money because you're marketing to empty shelves. People can't buy, even if you are successful in convincing them. Next, get it in, get it out. What do I mean by that? Well, getting distribution is really just the first step. A lot of people think, well, I got distribution, now everyone's going to buy it. Not the case. And so that, coupled with this philosophy of helping the importer and distributor do their jobs. Your job as the brand owner is to drive consumer demand at retail. It's not necessarily the importers, certainly not theirs exclusively, and certainly not the distributors as well. So the more we can do, you as the brand owner, to drive demand at retail and demonstrate that success to the trade, the more successful the brand is going to be. Next is a target audience. You can't be all things to all people, so make sure you're really, really important to a limited number of people. Determine your target, define it, and then focus on it rigorously. And now whether you're defining it through demographic terms through Facebook advertising, or region frequency numbers from magazines, or even regionality in terms of trade magazines by buying the New York issue of Beverage Media. And I would also add that defining who is not your target audience is as important as who is. It's too easy to say, yeah, that wouldn't be a bad thing, but I kind of like divide the world into must, should, and could, and we need to focus on the musts. And then lastly, identify and then leverage your brand's unique strengths. And what do I mean by that? Well, everybody comes to us and they say, well, I have really great wine. The reality is everybody makes really great wine these days, or most companies. So having a great bottle of wine or spirits or beer is necessary, but not sufficient. You need to have what I call a POD that MAD, a point of difference that makes a difference, something that gets people to actually take action. And here's a way to think about that. And the guiding principle there is you need to align the programs, marketing and promotion programs, with account needs. If we help them build their business, then we answer the question WIIFM. And for those of you who are not familiar with what that means, it means what's in it for me. And the questions you want to answer for them is, how are you going to increase sales, both volume and profitability? How are you going to increase customer frequency? And how are you going to increase new traffic to my specific store? If you put together programs that answer those questions, they are going to be that much more motivated to help you make your brand successful. So let's take a quick look at a snapshot of the U.S. market, and there's really good news all around. The most important piece being total table wine consumption continues to grow and has done for the last certainly 15 years and before that. And probably the best news about that is the per capita consumption is still relatively low in the United States. So while we are, as everybody knows, I think now, the largest wine consuming country in the world, we're also middle of the pack to low in terms of per capita consumption. And that means that there's a lot of headspace in the marketplace. So that's, as I say, good news. Next piece of the pie is, where should you be? So when we take kind of an overall look at it, you can see the top 10 wine states, or top 10 markets, represent almost 2/3 of the total volume of wine that's being sold. But that also doesn't tell you some things that are hidden. And I think it's important to recognize that concentration is really important at the macro level for nationally distributed products and helping you make decisions as to where you should invest marketing and promotion funds. But if your goal is only 5,000 cases, let's say in year one, or maybe 10,000 cases in year 2, 3, or 4, you don't really need to know about or even be participating in multiple states. It's very possible to do that volume in one state with a concentrated effort. Connecticut, for example, or Boston would be a good another one. Continuing to look at industry trends, and the good news is that there is a continuing increase in the number of wine selling channels. We also know from all the research that we see that wine and liquor stores represent the largest number of outlets, and while a lot of people from overseas would like to focus on supermarkets because that's what they're familiar with in their home markets, the reality is only a limited number of states in the U.S. permit supermarket sales of wines, and it's notably not permitted in New York at all. And even in states like New Jersey, where it technically is, a retailer can only have 3 stores. So it effectively is not a supermarket market. And the other thing to keep in mind is people shop at retail stores more frequently for wine. So while they're at grocery stores for other reasons, discount stores and so on and so forth, wine and liquor shops are a destination. What does that mean? It means that you really need to concentrate your efforts on off-premise accounts. That's where the action is. And within the concept of retail channels, we're seeing them fragment and multiply. Not only are there more of them coming online, but there's increased diversity in terms of whether they're real or virtual. And I think there, in terms of online sites of wineries or wine clubs, retail stores that do a tremendous amount of business on-premise, K&L is off-premise, online, e-commerce. K&L is an example of that. And then there's the online-only retailers. And what this slide points up, the yellow, is really what matters. Those are the high-frequency drinkers, and those are the core audience that we really need to be talking to. And the interesting thing is, they're buying it many, many different places. That means you have to be on the shelf in many of those places where they're going in order for them to find it and buy it. From a price point perspective, we're seeing the growth in the category is now over $9. Now, Nielsen uses a category of $9 to $11 as a break-even. Some other databases use $10 and up. But I think the big news there is that consumers are drinking a little bit more, just a little bit more, but they're drinking a lot better. And what does that mean? That means that half of the value of the business but 3/4 of the volume is done under $9. And that's really a no-win situation unless you're a big guy like Constellation who has the distribution efficiencies to profitably service that market. More importantly, half the value, but only 1/4 of the volume, is coming from these higher price points. And that's where we're seeing consumers gravitate. The sweet spot really is $12 to $15 and $15 to $20. So if you're bringing in new brands or new SKUs, that's the area you want to focus on. The next big change that we're seeing is this trend toward apps. And basically, online access to news, recommendations, where to buy, have displaced what used to be the traditional way that people found out about wines, Wine Spectator, Wine Enthusiast. So we're seeing sites like Wine Searcher, Delectable, Vivino, Wine for Me, Snooth, Hello Vino. And the interesting thing there is reach and scale. What do I mean by that? Well, Wine Searcher gets 3 million unique visitors per month. Delectable gets 2.1. What about the print publications? Wine Spectator has a circulation of 400,000, Wine Enthusiast 180, and Wine Advocate only 48,000. So you're seeing like an order of magnitude increase in your ability to reach people. But more than that, they are actively looking for information at that point in time. So they are really motivated and interested in what you have to say. So that's where we want to talk to people. And this has been validated by a study that just came out in the last couple of weeks from Sonoma State University in terms of, not surprising, the number of people that have smartphones, but look at the number of people who use, or percentage that use smartphones to check on prices or that have a wine app. We definitely need to be playing in the app game and learning how to leverage and exploit that. Another piece of information that we see is with e-commerce. E-commerce is rapidly growing. The latest numbers I heard from Nielsen, it's been averaging growth of about 15% a year. I think it's up to about 6 or 8% of the total business, depending on how you define it. But I think what's even more important here is this disproportionate share of import sales that are going through e-commerce compared to traditional retail. So if you are an exporter, if you're a brand from Portugal, Spain, Australia, New Zealand, and all those people signed up, you really need to be looking very carefully at e-commerce, particularly because of the penetration of the import category, as well as a bunch of other very compelling reasons as well. Okay, so what do I mean by getting to the point? You know, there's an old statement in advertising that says, I know half my advertising doesn't work, I just don't know which half. So if we look at a continuum from that being on one end of the spectrum to a pure online marketing, e-commerce model where everything is measurable, what we really want to do is move the point. This is kind of where we have been, say, prior to the year 2000. And what's been happening is we're gradually moving that point further to the right. And apps are allowing us to get much closer to the point in time when consumers are going to be buying something. And that means that our communications have to be more precise, more direct, and also address the questions or intuit the questions that we think consumers are going to have at that point in time. So some of the other dynamics that are happening, that may not be in your market, but they are happening in the major markets all over the country, and it'll ultimately be in many markets, if not most. So we're talking New York, San Francisco, Chicago, Miami, Los Angeles, San Francisco, I said San Francisco, Boston, and so on and so forth. And these are apps that people access on their smartphone. Names like Drizzly, Minibar Delivery, Drink, Thirsty, and Saucy. Drizzly actually just got an infusion of cash from WSWA. That's a really significant vote of confidence and indication that those things are going to be seriously affecting the US market. The other thing I like about them is that they're laser targeted to millennials, and the primary reason being millennials tend not to buy through e-commerce, but they do buy online through delivery within an hour service because they want immediate gratification and they don't want to pay a shipping upcharge. Baby boomers, like me, are more willing to wait a day and accepting of paying shipping charges. So once again, you can target your audience by the medium that they're using to purchase. These things are also geographically targetable, in many cases down to metro and even neighborhood basis, which gives you tremendous opportunities to really target and focus these things. And I know for a fact that mini bar delivery is very, very open to collaboratively working with suppliers and wholesalers. And then lastly, think of it as a tool to drive retail distribution and support the wholesaler and importer. I don't have the time to get into it in this presentation, but we have a wonderful example that happened for one of our clients where we were selling a, say, unusual product, but when our sales guy walked into the door and said, we're working with, at the time it was booze carriage, now mini bar delivery, they opened the door and said, welcome in, I'll take a case, as opposed to closing the door and saying, no, I'm not interested in it because nobody buys it. The retailers recognize that these things are driving incremental sales. And also, many of the ones that are participating in this thing also happen to be e-commerce players. Case in point for one of our products, 80% of the volume that's going out, or that's being sold in the New York market, is going outside of New York through e-commerce. Which brings us to the next point about e-commerce and really what makes it so significant. These are some of the players: K&L, Benny's, Drink Up New York, and Total Wine. But I love this part of it. It allows you to sell in multiple states, almost nationally, maybe 39, when you may only have distribution in one. So as a strategy, it may be the smart thing for you to come in and say, okay, I'll get an importer / distributor in the New York market, but I'm really going to align myself with e-commerce players in New York, and therefore will be able to sell to people in reciprocal states. E-commerce also, as I mentioned before, has strong penetration with baby boomers, and the big news there is they're spending 3x on the average purchase than they would in a physical store, and they're buying because of convenience. So if they might buy a bottle of this and a bottle of that, they're also going to get a 6-pack of beer or whatever else that site might be able to sell, or also do some looking for some interesting or featured wines. E-com is also recognized as having a better selection of hard-to-find wines, and I think where we're going to be going in the future is something called virtual inventory. And by that I mean, and it actually is in play right now through Beverage Media, if a product is for sale and licensed for sale in a particular state, a distributor or a retailer can order from a wholesaler and get it into his store the next day, and then fulfill an order for a product that he doesn't even have in stock. And therefore, the retailers themselves can start competing through e-commerce in ways that they can't as a physical store. Very interesting. And then, of course, there's the new models of Amazon and flash sale sites and so on and so forth, like Wine Still Sold Out, Lot 18, and so forth, which are really changing the game and impacting how wines are chosen, distributed, and ultimately purchased. So further on the e-commerce thing, here's what I think is a really interesting slide. And what we've done is we've divided the world between DTC and pure and traditional retail sales. And what's going on here? DTC means direct to consumer. Now, as many of you know, in the US, domestic wineries are allowed to sell directly to consumers through cellar door sales and wine clubs and so on and so forth. And in the traditional world, through Nielsen, these are the kind of the rankings of what are the most popular varietals. And there's no surprise there. It shouldn't be to anyone. Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon, red blends which have grown, so on and so forth. But look at the difference between what's selling at DTC in comparison to what's selling in traditional retail. And what you're seeing here is Cabernet, and I think that's a lot of cult wines or esoteric wines, for lack of a better word. Again, a choice of a wide range of choices in Pinot Noir. Red blends are still important. And then you're seeing Zinfandel, Syrah, Shiraz, and other varietals that may not come up as strongly in a retail store. People are looking for different things when they're buying direct to consumer. How do you play in that game? Well, it's absolutely critical. Not an option to not have That's a double negative. I apologize for that. It's absolutely mandatory that you have a where to buy function on your website, and we highly recommend that you have that function embedded in your Facebook page too. Because if you're spending the money to drive people to come and friend you on Facebook or come to your website, you need to be able to satisfy the one thing that you want them to do and that they're probably coming to you for, and that is, I want to buy it. Where can I buy it? Give them that answer. So let's change tack a little bit here. Several of the people, well, more than several, a lot of the people that I talked to who were coming to this presentation were from outside the country, and we're looking for importers. So I put just a few slides in here on how you go about that. And granted, this is just not superficial, but it's a top level look at it. Well, let's make sure that we understand the difference between an importer and a distributor. And technically, an importer is someone who's licensed to import a wine from a supplier outside the U.S. into America. They may or may not have distributor licenses. Some do, many do, or they may not even have operations or distribution licenses in certain states, but they're bringing the product in from overseas. The distributor, which is synonymous with the word wholesaler in our country, and I know that it has a different definition, a bit broader, countries like the UK, they're basically the person who's licensed to buy the wine from an importer and sell it to an on and off-premise retailer. That's the second tier of the three-tier system. So what's happened is the model has really changed, okay? From an age when there were a limited number of suppliers, more importers, distributors, and ultimately a large number of consumers, it's now turned a triangle into an hourglass. And so while there's a lot more suppliers, and there's a lot more consumers, there's this stranglehold or constraint point, if you will, at the neck of the hourglass at the distributor and importer level, which are the ones who are determining what products can and ultimately will be sold in the United States. You need to understand that so that you can act on it and that you can do the things that I was talking about in terms of zigging versus zagging. So what does that mean? Well, just think about the idea of I'm looking for an importer. Now, a lot of people might say, hey, I only want Diageo, Pernod, Beam, Constellation, and one of those people. The reality is they probably don't want you. In many cases, they're only looking at owned brands now and not really interested in agency brands. So you need to be looking at things beyond the obvious of specialty national importers like Winebow or Palm Bay, or even regional or multi-state importers like what was TGIC and now is Guarachi Partners. Think about specialists that are importers, but they also distribute. Slocum in Connecticut is an example. You can set up your own import company. Maybe you have someone who's a child of winery owners who's graduating college or been in the market for a few months, a few years, and can come to the U.S. and set up shop and really represent you there. Then you can work on national licensing import services such as MHW. And this is basically renting the services of someone to get your label approval, clear a product through customs, do the logistics to get the products into the U.S., but then the burden of marketing the brand is yours. The difference being that they don't take a full margin, and that leaves money for you to invest in marketing. Should also be thinking about large distributors that also import. Glazers is an example. Or even chain retailers where they have their own exclusive brand program, and a perfect example of that is the Winery Direct program from Total Wine & More. And two others that people don't necessarily think about, but I think can be brilliant strategies for the right brand in the right situation, is think about doing direct import through control states. If you can get Pennsylvania or Ohio to approve your brand, generally speaking, you'll get instant distribution in a large number of stores. And that's something that you can't guarantee or count on in a traditional open state. So you have options. These aren't necessarily all of them, nor have I gone into them in detail, but the point is you have to think bigger than just saying, I'm going to hire Winebow, they're going to sell my brand, I'm done. So what do importers want? I know we've got a couple in the audience right now. Two basic things. One, they need to fill an identified void in their portfolio. So they're looking for brands that have existing U.S. volume that they can grow because of whatever their particular strengths are. New brands that they feel their expertise can develop and grow. Say somebody's big in on-premise and we know that Prosecco is growing and they don't have one, then all of a sudden Prosecco may be something they're interested in. And lastly, brands that have a unique positioning. And I don't mean weird in that case. I mean something where they're competing on as a point of difference that makes a difference that others in the marketplace simply don't have. And it could be something like charities, or it could be unique blends, moving beyond GSM and some of those other non-traditional blends. They're also looking for the right chemistry. And what they mean by chemistry is that your brand in association with you is going to enhance their image, their value, and their profitability. It's got to be in synergy with yours, but at the end of the day, it's theirs that really matters because they're the one that's going to be making the decision. Second, it needs to be able to strengthen the importer's position within the trade in terms of the depth or breadth of their portfolio. They want to make sure that, then you want to make sure that the supplier fully understands the three-tier system, and attending this seminar is a good first step in that regard. We see many times talking with importers, and they're saying, listen, if they don't understand the three-tier system, I don't have time to teach them. I'm not going to talk to them. And lastly, you need to be able to prove that you're financially sound and that you have the budget to invest and support the brand. And actually, that goes on both sides, importer as well as supplier. So if you're going to present to importers, and by the way, let me interrupt and say that, as Zach mentioned, this presentation is being recorded. You'll be able to access it. It'll take about 24 hours. We're also going to give you a link to get a copy of the PDF, so you don't have to write all of these things down. So we're kind of moving along on time. I want to make sure that we make it. What do importers want to see? They want you to show them what is the brand point of difference, what's the value proposition for the consumer, and why that particular importer should be interested in you. You've got to have a real 30-second elevator speech that hits home on things that are important to them. Second, make sure that you have a company description and history, and don't go on in painful detail about it, but enough to differentiate and qualify yourself. Then have all the information you need in terms of sell sheets or product fact sheets, variety, styles, ranges, proposed retail price by line or SKU. You need to have the marketing materials as background ready to show in English. If all you have them in is German, you're probably not going to get an audience in the United States. If you can articulate who your defined audience is, it's going to help the importer recognize, this guy really understands what he's trying to do, and I can work with him. And then be upfront about a past history of importers, distributor agreements, a list of distributors or brokers that have managed your product in the past. Everybody wants to know, are there any landmines buried out there that I need to know about, any existing inventory that's going to be compromising any inventory a new importer, might bring in. Price structures, as I mentioned earlier, you need a marketing support budget, and you need a sample budget. Think about 2% of total sales for a good sample budget. So flipping down to the next level, what's happening on the distributor level? Well, much as we're seeing in some other categories, absolute concentration of distributors. Actually, I got ahead of myself. I skipped a slide. Excuse me one moment. And it didn't show. I apologize for that. So what do distributors want? I was in a great presentation by Bruce Levine of Charmer Sunbelt, and he said, we want the 5 M's, and I added a C just to be different. And what he meant by that was money. You need money to invest behind the brand. Margin, make sure that the margin is significant enough to get the attention of the wholesaler. Manpower, meaning brand ambassadors or bring your winemakers over on a regular or more frequent basis. You need to support the brand with feet on the street. Marketing dollars, and then of course media, and that's changing now from the old days of Wine Spectator to support like Facebook ads, Google AdWords, all those kinds of things. And then the last one I would add there is commitment. And what do I mean by that? Well, it's kind of the difference between involved versus committed. Let's say that you're going to be having breakfast of bacon and eggs, right? The way we like to think about it is the chicken is involved, but the pig is committed. And what the distributor wants to know is that you're committed and have a burn the boat strategy, and that you're committed to make this brand successful, that you're not going to bail out because you don't have enough money or enough stick-to-itiveness. They've seen that so many times in the past, they're very, very leery about it. All right, well, maybe, let's say you've really accomplished something. You've got an importer, you've got a distributor. Now what are you going to do with them? All right. I think you need to recognize that you're not a priority, that you and your importer are going to have to do the heavy lifting yourself, certainly for the first couple of years until the brand is proven at retail. And what we recommend is that you recruit or focus on a limited set of salespeople within a given distributor that are dedicated to your plan.